warmly welcome on behalf of SLASSCOM for this CXO briefing, which we feel is a huge binder in the strategies of SLASSCOM. And today we have Julian with us, from Google obviously, who's going to talk about innovation. Coming from the IT BPO sector and the knowledge processing sector, innovation today is nothing that we have to shout about, because innovate or perish. That's the game. So we are very fortunate to have Julian, and I know companies like Google invest a huge amount of money on innovation as well as R&D. So we in Sri Lanka, we are very happy to have you here, right, to share some of your thoughts and some of your direction, which will really help the industry and the participants today. SLASSCOM acts as a catalyst of growth for the Sri Lankan IT and BPO industry by facilitating trade and business propagation and education and employment, encouragement of research and innovation, and by supporting the creation of a progressive national policy or framework. In the competitive world of today, innovation is a key to survival and growth. The complex challenge of making new ideas with well-established and practice remains a challenge that needs to be addressed by both innovators and those adopting the innovating ideas. The SLASSCOM CXO Forum with Julian, who is the Managing Director of Southeast Asia and Operations for Google, is today with us to share their thoughts, his thoughts and his experience with us. After Julian's address, we have a very interesting panel discussion, and I would kindly ask all of you to participate in this. And Madu Ratnayake from Virtusa, Sanath from Ridgecrest, and Chandika will examine the subject of innovation in Sri Lanka context. At this moment, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our partners, HSBC, ACCA, Daily FT and Daily Mirror. I sincerely thank you, Julian and Google, for being with us today. And let me also thank my colleagues, Madu, Sanath and Chandika, for spending their time here, who has organized this event, and also the SLASSCOM staff who has helped immensely in organizing this event. There's one request, additional request. We are having a similar breakfast briefing tomorrow, which will be with Mr. Gotabe Rajapaksa, Minister of Defence and Urban Development Secretary, who will examine the future outlook for urban infrastructure development in Sri Lanka. The registration for this event closes at noon tomorrow, and I would kindly request if you are not registered, to register by 12 today. Thank you very much.
It's now my great pleasure to invite Julian to address you. Julian is Managing Director of Southeast Asia Sales and Operations for Google Inc. Prior to that, he spent his entire life in online businesses working for Yahoo Search Marketing and the UK auction site QXL. Prior to moving to the Singapore regional office as head of Southeast Asia sales, he was head of Google Australia, head of business development for Google Australia, helping small and medium businesses take advantage of online marketing. So if you, I know there are some budding entrepreneurs here, any questions, please do not hesitate to ask Julian. And also Sanath is the head of our entrepreneurship forum. These are moderators. So anything in regards to developing a new business and taking it to a whole new level, you can ask Julian how Google did it, and also his experience across various other companies as well. Julian, the floor is yours.
Welcome, and I think the privilege is actually all mine to be here. Thanks so much for the invite. Am I allowed to walk away from it? Was that best way, wasn't it? Sounds a bit distant between everybody. Part of innovation is actually culture, and as a culture we don't really often wear suits, so I'm going to kind of, you can be serious without a suit is one of the things that we say, so I'm going to actually take my suit jacket on. I managed to have some of your fruit without getting over my nice white shirt that Rowan had created for me with the logo there. So I'm going to talk to you for maybe 20-25 minutes on culture of innovation. Before I do that, I just wanted to, this is my first visit to Sri Lanka, and unfortunately there's not much time to actually see much of the country, but what I've seen already, it looks fantastic. I think it must have been one of the warmest welcomes that I've had in many of the countries in Southeast Asia. And for us, Southeast Asia is actually 40 countries, that's how Google measures it. So it's everyone from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and it sort of stretches beyond Southeast Asia, as you know. But this is certainly the warmest welcome that I've had just over the last 12 hours. It's a country actually that my dad visited before he died with my mum, one of the last trips he made. And he always said to me, you've got to go to Sri Lanka, it's the best place I've visited. So finally today I actually have made it, which is great. So I'm going to talk a bit about culture. Before I do that, I just want to say why I'm so excited about working in the region overall, and in Asia, actually in the Asian context. What we've seen and what we're seeing at Google happening right now is a massive pivot of power, if you like, in some ways, of where the people are on the internet. And just to put that in context, from 2010 to 2015, there's going to be 1 billion new internet users coming online in emerging markets, which obviously Sri Lanka is one. In fact, just over the next 2 years, there's 500 million people coming online. A lot of the time they're coming online in their first connections with a mobile phone. If you put that into context in the US, during that same period, the next 2 years, when there's 500 million coming online across emerging markets, there's just 15 million, 1.5, coming online in the US. So the future is very much in Asia, and Southeast Asia is playing a major part, certainly for Google and the industry overall. And so that's why we're excited, the sheer volume of people that are connecting for the first time, and how that might change their lives. People starting businesses, I've already talked to some people who have business proposals. There seems to be a lot of vibrancy and excitement, and that contrasts greatly sometimes when you go back to Europe, which is slowing down in terms of growth. To see the vibrancy in many of these Southeast Asian markets is quite exciting. So just to give you some context, I've been in the company 8 years, sometimes it seems like 8 months, sometimes 80 years, depending on what sort of day I'm having. And during those 8 years, I joined perhaps when there was maybe 2,500 people, so still a reasonably sizable company. Now there, if you include Motorola, there's 57,000 people. So 95% of the company has essentially joined after I joined. And one of the big challenges we have as a company is how you can grow to that speed and still retain that soul of a startup. It's a very difficult thing to do. So the way I'm going to talk about this is not to preach. You know, some guy turns up from Singapore, works in Singapore and tells you how you should innovate. That's not the idea here. There's a lot that Google needs to continue to innovate itself. It's not like we're the perfect innovators. There's lots we can learn from companies in the room. Innovation is definitely a two-way thing. So please don't, I'm going to share with you some of the things that we do in the company. It doesn't necessarily mean right for every company, but hopefully it'll give you some perspective. This is very useful. So, the mission of the company is to organise the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, I don't know about you, but for many of the companies I've worked for, missions are created and then the CEO puts them in the drawer and hides them away. This is the one company that I've actually worked for where their mission is front and centre of everything we do. Yeah? And it's such a grand mission that it's impossible to do. Right? If you think about how much data is created, even there's people emailing now or tweeting, that's more data that's being created by the second. Our mission is to organise all that data. And when I talk about data, it's not just web data. It's data in books, it's videos, it's any human-created data. So this is a very grandiose mission, but it's central to what we as a company do. And I think that's one of the cornerstones of innovation, is to have a very clear vision about what you want to achieve. It doesn't have to be as big a vision as that, but a big vision, whatever you're doing, is something almost reaching, we call moonshots, reaching for the semi-impossible. It starts there, I think. And I think what I'm going to do is talk about some 9 notions of innovation that we've kind of found to be useful. Again, it started for us, if you go back to Google when we IPO'd in 2004, in the founder's letter, we said we don't want to be an ordinary company, essentially, words to that effect. And it's ever since then, the challenge for us is to keep in our DNA that sense of innovation, that sense of great is not necessarily good enough. And one of the things, as many people know, is that often Google launches products and they're not perfect. Innovation is about iteration in some ways. It's about getting feedback. It's about changing the product to suit the needs of customers. And so what we tend to do as a company is launch, and it's not a perfect product necessarily, and then we move forward to iterate. I think it was one of the generals in the US who was saying he makes decisions on 40, I think it's Colin Powell said 40 to 70% decisions. If you're in that area, you should move forward. Often if you wait to 100% of information to make a decision, it's too slow. And as we've heard, if you don't innovate quickly, there's a strong danger that you could be superseded by competitors. I'll give you a couple of examples. Certainly if you look at search, who knows when Google was founded? There's no prize, so no one's put their hands up. 1998, right? So 15 years ago. And it was, one of the reasons it was successful initially, if you remember, there were other search engines. There was, sorry, you can't record me now. Do you want me to come back here? Is that easier for you? Okay. Certainly, if you think about search in those days, search was a very simple thing, a simple page with a box. And to some extent, it still is. But if you look at that evolution of search, people are now mobile. People are using, you've got voice search. Search is becoming more of an assistant to you. So we have this product, Google Now. If you look at the types of information that we're collecting, it used to be just web pages, essentially. There's books, there's videos, there's other content. This is something that evolves and will continue to evolve. It's not something that a product that's fixed and done and then we move on to the next product. We often say that search is 5% done. That's what our former CEO said, Eric Schmidt. We're 5% there. And we seem to have been 5% there continually because it's such a big mission. Same with video. If you look at that timeline there, you can see the innovation around video. There was never we'll never reach perfection, but we should be aiming for perfection. I remember when Google, who remembers Google Video? Before YouTube? Yes. And now the iteration's on YouTube. YouTube's now mobile. We do YouTube live streaming. So innovation is iterative. That's the key point here. Sharing everything you can. As I said at the beginning, having a very innovative company means you have to have a very innovative culture, and you need to cherish that culture, in our experience. And so one of the key assets for that is transparency. And I can give you an example of that. If you look at what we do as groups, we have this concept of TGIF. Who knows what TGIF is? Thank God it's Friday. Or in some cases, thank God it's almost Friday, which we do on a Thursday. That's an open forum. That's where anyone in the company can question the CEO. That's where the receptionist can hold the CEO of Google to account and ask them very important questions about our strategy with Android. I've been at a TGIF where people have asked, why have you taken the M&Ms of that particular M&M colour out of the fridge? So it's from the mundane to the strategic. I think the point here is opening up the airways of a company and allowing the management team to get a sense of what's great in the company and what needs to improve is fundamentally important. So transparency is one of the ways you can do that. It's about sharing information as well as being receptive to getting information. Small teams is also important, small agile teams, and that's something that the company is focused on. We have this concept where it says OKRs. These are online key results, and so we measure what we do, and we're almost slavishly looking at how we can improve. One of the other assets which is not up here is this concept of failure. Failure is often seen as such a negative thing. In our company, we in some ways try to celebrate failure. You need to be failing fast. It doesn't mean we set out to fail, but certainly, if you're not failing enough, you're probably not innovating enough, not innovating quickly enough. And failing fast is a concept that is kind of cherished within the company. So here's the images of TGI. These are our leaders. So this is Larry and Sergey, the founders of the company, and Eric Schmidt. Don't worry, there's no Gangnam style dancing videos. It's all moved on to something else now. But these guys are very accessible. And for those people who don't want to raise their hands in meetings to ask them questions directly, because not everyone will, there's the ability to post questions, and those questions can be voted on. So we're democratizing the questioning so that the most popular or important questions rise to the top and they'll answer them. Having an environment which fosters this is such an important seed of innovation. Before you can go anywhere, employees need to feel that they can question the management teams and contribute as well. One of the things is also hiring. So we put I certainly must have slid through the net, but 8 years ago, maybe the standard wasn't as high. The standard keeps getting higher, and we need to set the bar high. You know, it's often said that a great engineer is worth 10 times a good engineer. And that concept of your people, yeah, of course we have huge infrastructure, and that's an asset for us as a company. And we have great algorithms, but it's down to the people. And it's probably one of the biggest cliches in business, is it's all about the people, and the people are your asset. But not many companies actually hold that true. And we see that it's fundamentally important you get the right people. And we see that having a massive impact on our success as a company. And also having as diverse a workforce as possible. This is important. Particularly gender diversity. In management teams that have a significant portion of their management team as female actually perform better. Say that again, another way around. If you have a management team with all men, you won't perform as well, on average. So diversity is important, and not just gender diversity, but a range of diversity we found to be important. The more you can mix up your gene pool of your talent, often the better result you'll get. And resist good enough. I mean, compromising, it's easy to compromise for the sake of speed, but this is something that the company certainly tries to resist. And some of you in the audience, smarter than me, may be able to answer this, but here's an example of a recruitment ad for Google, for engineers rather than the sales people. But, so the first 10-digit prime founding consecutive digits of E, whatever that means, if you could answer that, this was on a board on a highway, I think in San Francisco. So it's playing to the curiosity of the real kind of techies. And if you can answer that question and put it in front of .com, you'll go to a page where you can actually get an interview for a job. So these types of, it's almost patting them on the back for being clever, but it's also kind of weeding out people who can't answer the question. So I think there's innovative techniques for actually hiring people as well that can be explored. And this is Ray Kurzweil. Who's heard of Ray Kurzweil? He's kind of a futurist. He writes books and talks about the development of humanity. We've just hired this guy. And I think in hiring inspiring leaders and people into the company, where you can, is important. Now, a lot of the companies here, maybe smaller companies, you won't be able to hire. You know, Google has a lot of resources. But that doesn't mean, I think hiring great people is more critical at a smaller stage because they make an impact in terms of a percentage. If you've got 10 people and you hire 3 people who are not going to contribute, that's a bigger problem than you feel Google and with 50,000 people. One of the other concepts is to really, I was talking to a couple of people before I got started about freedom. Again, it's kind of a very generic word. How do you put these things into practice in your culture? And This concept of 20% time, who's heard of 20% time? It's quite an alien concept for many companies. This is where, particularly in engineering and product on the tech side of Google, we give our engineers the ability to work on projects that they're interested in. Now that doesn't mean they can go and play golf or go to the bar all day. It means that they're focusing on areas that they're passionate about. And they can take 20% of their time. Now it might be 1 day a week, but it might be a couple of months a year on these projects. And the value here is, if you hire passionate people and you allow them to follow their dreams, sometimes great results can happen. Google News, I think, was an example of how that came from 20% time. Across the business, actually, even regardless of 20% time, people are encouraged to get involved in projects. People are encouraged to work across different areas, not limiting people's scope by just their job description. And it's tremendously empowering when you have an employee, even a junior employee or someone who's relatively new to the company, and you allow them to stretch themselves into areas that are not their job description. Now, it doesn't mean everyone's doing everyone else's job, but it certainly allows you to really tap into sometimes unexpected talents that people have. The Google News is an example there, Chrome to Fun, Gmail, these were all sample 20% projects. Often, I was saying earlier, we talk to CFOs and they think all this stuff's a big waste of money. Right? That's the challenge everyone has when they go back to the office and you say, I heard some ideas, this is what Google's doing. They'll say, well, they're a big company, they make $50 billion a year. Of course they can do that, but they've got enough money. But a lot of these concepts were in the DNA of the company when it started. And I forget, we were 2 people in a garage, right? Just like, one person in a garage for Facebook, maybe. Yahoo, 2 people in a garage. Many of these big tech companies, with 2 people bands, they were small. And they started with this kind of innovation in their DNA. So it's not just a big company thing. And when I talk to these CFOs, we try to explain to them, this is not so much a cost, this is an investment. And in fact, it's a critical investment, because if you don't do it, there are repercussions of not being innovative. Similarly, with the environment you have with the employees, we encourage our employees, well, you can't tell, to be healthy. We have food. There's almost, I think there's a rule, unwritten rule in Google where food's always kind of 100 feet away. A lot of people know that we have these kitchens where we have breakfast and lunch, and it's free for the employees. Again, that's seen by many other companies as a cost. We find this to be an investment. We find that people collaborating, sitting together, eating together, coming together, has such great repercussions for the culture and ultimately the business. You have an engineer sit next to a sales guy, and the sales guy will say, I've got X, Y, and Z problem. The engineering can then say, oh, that's interesting, can go away, potentially use their 20% time to work and solve a problem. This is not top-down management, this is not ordained by somebody from above. This is coming from the grassroots, and that's what makes it so much more powerful. I'm going ahead of my future, my slides, but when you look at ideas come from anywhere, one of the other things that we try to do is really enable people to move around. And I guess for a multinational company it's a bit easier, but I've been very lucky because I've moved across 3 different functions, across 2 different geographies. But one thing we're always trying to do is encourage the fertilization of talent. Move people around departments, move people around different areas of the business, different geographies. Mixing up the DNA within certain teams really brings very strong results. It's good for the people as well, they feel invested in. And when you talk about empowering, when we've got these Google business groups, who's familiar with the Sri Lanka Google business group? Some of you hopefully have attended, yeah. So that's one of the initiatives that the company has where, again, all the best ideas don't come from Google, right? Inevitably the best ideas come from outside the company. And so inspiring people to set up and be self-managed groups with some support is actually a very positive thing. So when we're thinking about innovation, we're not just thinking about what we can do as a company, but how we can inspire an ecosystem that can work. Google Doodles. This was February the 4th? Yeah. You can see on my shirt. And this was an innovation. We started off with one person who, I think we changed the first doodle to coincide with, I think, with the birthday of someone's event, some famous event. And then this was seen to be very popular. So there's not many companies in the world that will change their logo every so often on the pages. And that's something that's become institutionalized. And you can be very innovative with these. And this was a static one, I believe. But I think we had the Pac-Man one. There was a game with the Pac-Man. I don't know how many years of people's lives that wasted. So maybe innovation there was not so good. I was talking to a group of 11 to 18-year-olds about innovation a couple of weeks back. And I was explaining to them the Gangnam Style video. Because I did a calculation, I did a quiz. And I did a calculation of how many years, actually, was spent watching that video by people. It's quite scary, right? So it's a 4 minute 9 second video, and it was watched probably now 1.4 billion times. So I was testing them because they're all good at math, these kids, better than me. I was seeing if they could get the answer. If you watched end to end every view of Gangnam Style video, and you didn't sleep, you didn't rest, how many years would it take? Any ideas? Again, there's no prize. It's actually 11,000 years. So you'd have had to have started at 9,000 BC, started watching that video, you'd still be watching it today. But I think, so there's different types of innovation. I think how people spend their time's up to them, but certainly Google's a company that wants to inspire innovation across its platforms. And one of the things we actually did as well, we took this to another level, and this is where I was talking about iterating, how you can take an idea and evolve it. We were designing the doodles, so we said, what happens if our users design the videos, and particularly school children? And so we had this competition for people to design doodles all around the world, actually, in different places. We did one in Thailand, and thousands of kids were kind of doing these doodles. And their prize was that they had the Google homepage for the day, the winning doodle. It was voted on, and they had that prize for the homepage. But when I was talking, and this struck me last week when I was talking to certainly the younger generation in inverted commas about innovation. This was at a school actually my daughter goes to, and it really kind of hits home when I was supposed to be going to talk to them about innovation, and it sort of spun the other way around. I haven't got the slide here, but one of the slides I put up was that if you go back to 1957 on the S&P, on the index in the US, the average age for companies there was 75 years. Right? So 60 years ago. In 2003, I've gone down to 25 years. This year it's 10 years, the average age of companies that are listing. The interesting fact for the people I was talking to, those sort of 13, 14-year-olds, was that the companies that they're going to work for don't actually exist yet, which is an interesting concept. You're going to work for companies that don't even exist. And what struck me is I then had a second slide which talked about innovation and how the world's changed for entrepreneurs. And I know that's something that you guys hold dear to your heart. There was a company, I think it's called Ouya, that developed an Android-based games machine. So like a console, like an Xbox type PlayStation 3. And what they'd done is they'd used Android software to do this. They'd set out to raise $1 million. They used crowdsourcing. I think they used Kickstarter, and they raised $1 million in 8 hours. And then after 30 days, they'd raised $8 million, $8.5 million. They stopped the funding. So I was telling these children, these kids about this. Isn't that great? Companies, you're going to be working for companies that don't exist, and you're going to see a different way of funding, and suddenly there's a competitor for Sony and Microsoft there that's been created in 30 days. Hasn't the world changed? And this 14-year-old put his hand up and said, I was an investor, I'm going to their launch party in a couple of weeks. It turns out they'd had 67,000 investors for that 8 million, and as crowdsourcing works, he was one of the people who was interested in that project and helped fund it. So there was me with a slide trying to say, look, this is how innovation works, guys, and there's one of the kids who's actually done it. So that was a big wake-up call, that the world is actually kind of speeding up, and there are different mechanisms. The playing field has been leveled. You know, I'm not saying it's easy starting a company. My wife started her own business, and I know that the challenge that was to run that business, watching from the side. And I worked when I was in Australia, working with a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs, and I really admired them. But one of the things that really encourages me is the barriers. The web is making the barriers to starting a business and growing a business much smaller. There's this book, The World is Flat, which it's not saying the world is literally flat, but the playing field has been leveled, accessibility for everybody. And I think that's fundamentally important, particularly in emerging markets, where you don't necessarily have the resources, but you do have the enthusiasm, passion, and brain power. One of the other things we try and do is, you know, as a company often gets bigger, it can become more political, and people's opinions can become fundamentally important. Factions, cliques within companies. It's really important you try and break those down. And I have to say, one of the pleasures of working in a company is data usually wins. Right? If you can show, it doesn't matter if you're the receptionist or the CEO, if you can use data to prove a point, that's fundamentally, it's more likely you're going to win the argument. Don't politically use data. We found that right across the business. And data's not just about engineering or products. It's about our people operations. Our HR teams use data to judge kind of the type of people we're hiring for performance management. Getting data from your companies, no matter what company you're running, and being able to analyze that data is now a key asset. And so we tend to invest a lot in making sure that we have access to that data. This is an example for people analytics. Just some images. So traditionally, HR departments, if you see the HR department, that means you're going to get fired or you've got a pay rise, one of those two things. The way we look at, and I think this is another cornerstone, I think, of how you innovate, is that you bring in the people capital people, right? So the HR operation, and they're business partners. They help you plan the talent, they help succession management, they help you see ahead where are the gaps in your company in terms of talent. How do you develop people you've got? How do you put the right training and development in place to develop your people? So when we talk about, you know, there's innovation, disregard the bounds of what we know. You know, Google has made, is mostly known for search, right? We've got Android, we've got YouTube, we've got loads of other products that people use, which we're very pleased about. But what's the next big thing? If we're talking about thinking big, what the next big thing? So we have this Google X team within Google, who are really innovating at a very kind of super strategic moonshot, we call it, shooting for the moon level. And out of this we've come, who's heard of the driverless car? Yeah. So these things are incredible because they literally are driverless. You say driverless cars and people say, oh, there must be someone sitting there and driving it for you, and occasionally they take their hand off the wheel. No, these are really genuinely driverless cars. And the idea is, you know, there's so many road deaths a year, how can we cut that in half? Because although people enjoy driving all the time, they're not always the best drivers. I was pleasantly surprised in the lack of traffic in Colombo. I thought it was a bit risky leaving the time we did, but compared to other places, there's certainly a lot less traffic. But the point here is there is a unit within Google that really looks at big, innovative ideas. Google Glasses is something, what is that concept of wearable computing. And one of the concepts, which is not written down here necessarily, was this idea of whatever company you're running, you can take a kind of a 70-20-10 approach to it in terms of resourcing. You know, 70% of what you do, the money you spend, the marketing money, the people, the assets, are based around the core of what you're doing. 20% can be innovating around that core. You know, it's still very, very strongly related to your core products, but it's on to the next stage. And then you've got this kind of 10% here. Big projects, some which may fail fast, right? And some which could actually change the world. And I think that's the way they call a big company, but it's easy for you to say this, but users and usage and money will follow. If you focus too much on the revenue initially, often this leads you down the wrong path. Focusing on the user if you delight the user and build a big user base, you will be able to monetize it, particularly on the web now as online advertising has become more prevalent. And it's not so built out here in Southeast Asia or Sri Lanka. I mean, let me give you some context. In the UK, online advertising is now bigger than TV advertising. It's 35% of all ad dollars. It's the largest percentage in the world. So $1 in $3 is spent online. Typically in Southeast Asia, it's 1%. So there's a big headroom for very savvy people to start businesses and move in this area, because it will grow, and it's starting to grow very quickly. But those people who are focused on the user and building audiences will be the ones who will win out, because they'll be able to monetize that audience later on. Again, simplified user experience rather than plastic. When was the last time you saw an ad on the Google homepage? Don't really see them. And that's because we don't want to interfere with the user experience. Another thing that we've learned is don't necessarily kill projects, but morph them. If you're innovating at speed, often one of the casualties is that you go down the wrong path, as was suggested. But often something you've learned from that project or a piece of technology you have from that project can be used in another area. Google Wave was an example. Who remembers Google Wave? Yeah. Didn't really work out, but there were elements of that we could take and bring forward into other products we were doing. So we could morph that and elements of that into other products. That's something that we've learned to be fundamentally important. The Google Voice is one. So, just coming to a conclusion, what we found is that innovation is a word that's kind of bandied around a lot, but it's basically a fundamental principle of what we do as a company. And I would argue it should be a fundamental principle of every company. It's kind of deeply embedded in the DNA of Google that we need to continue to innovate. And in some cases that can be uncomfortable, because change is, it doesn't matter who you are, change is sometimes uncomfortable. If you're working on a project and you need to, about change calls, this can be difficult for the people working on the project. But one of the sort of founding principles of the company was that we were able to pivot and move quickly. And I would encourage all of you guys to have another look back in your company. I'm sure there's lots of innovative stuff you're doing which you could teach companies like us, but the founding principle of innovation to me is culture. If you get the culture right, you have a really strong foundation to kind of build upon that and bring that innovation alive within your company. With that, there's the picture of the garage. That's where it started. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for the invitation. The last slide, that's all the stuff that people think about, the massages. People do work sometimes at Google.
I'd like to invite our panelists to come and take their seats on the panel. We have Mr. Sanath Fernando, who is the moderator for the day. I will read his profile once the comments settle down. We've asked very brief profiles, so the PAs have sent over very, very brief profiles. And maybe of this panel is Chandika Jayasundara, CEO of Synergics. Please, Chandika, join us here. And Madu is very well known, General Manager of Virtusa and Senior Vice President. Madu will also join us. And of course, we'd like to have Julian back up here.
Let me start by posing a question to Julian. Many companies, I think this is true, not just Sri Lanka or the region, but the world over, you get companies starting with innovation. They have an idea and they work on it, okay, so they get going. And when it does work, successfully or not at some level, after a while you get into a rut. You are doing this thing, doing what the customer wants. And then what happens is the innovation, you just stagnate at that level, you don't get to the next level, you don't innovate, and it might be bad just in itself that you're not growing, but also somebody might come and then take your entire business away. So what are the, what could you offer in terms of insights for existing companies? What do you do to foster innovation? How do you break down the traditional mindset and start focusing on the now to think about the future as well, and potentially even cannibalize your own businesses to do something new?
It's a very good question. We've got a real-life example going on within the company at the moment, which is the move to mobile search. So if you think Google's built its reputation on desktop search, right? You open up a laptop, you go and search, you find stuff. But the move to mobiles happened more quickly than anyone's thought. So many countries around the world are just about to sort of pass this crossover moment, is the way we look at it, in which there are more mobile searches on Google than there are desktop. Right? So this creates either an opportunity or a threat, depending on the way you look at it. And what we did 4 or 5 years ago when we launched Android as one recognition of this, we also invested heavily on mobile services, recognizing that the user behavior was going to change. So instead of, I guess, doubling down our efforts and trying to stop people searching on mobile, providing no services on mobile, we said, right, our strategy needs to change. And we were very vocal about this publicly. We said, we now have a mobile-first strategy, even though our business was built on desktop search. And so the whole company then pivots around this strategy, which is a recognition that user behavior has changed, and we need to align around that. So I'm not saying we've completed that transition, but what we could have done is sort of closed in on ourselves and deny this is actually happening. So I think one of the things that we've learned is you can't be too introspective. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier. We found that if you focus on the user, that's where you've got to put your laser focus on the user. Not your own company's legacy revenue, but the user or your customer, whoever your user or customer is. In our case, it's people searching, and it's not as if they're stopping searching completely on desktop, but a lot of their behavior patterns are changing. And as a company, you need to realign around this new reality, otherwise you are not in a position where you can grow your business.
Thank you, Julian. Actually, before we go on to something else, let me pose the same thing. Madu comes to us from a very large global organization. Shantik is a young entrepreneur with a relatively small organization. So let's pose the same question to the two spectrums and just get your views on how you handle these situations and also what insights you would offer to others.
Yeah, I think, echo some of the sentiments Julian sharing. It's really, Virtusa is a services company, we're not a product company, as traditional sense what a product means. And we work with a lot of our consumers and helping them to innovate in their products and services that we're building. So our challenge is how do we continue to be at the cutting edge with our customers. It's always about the customer and the client. The way that we are trying to address that is really putting your smartest guys on the periphery of the company, where you really deal with your customers. As opposed to keeping them in your R&D labs and your center of the company, we believe innovation happens at the periphery of the company where it interacts with the consumers. So one of the big things we're pushing is really driving that innovation down to the engineers and the client services teams and who are working with our customers. And that's where they will see, right? You have to be there to see an opportunity. You can't be in the center of the company and think through these big ideas. Is really innovation for us is making small steps and then really driving that with our customers. So one of the big things is about driving innovation at the periphery and enabling the periphery with your best people.
Thank you. Lanka?
So we are a smaller company, just 15, 16 people, and we are product-based. So the key challenge is when you first started, as Sanath said, it was all innovation. And after a few years, you have to stop and actually try and profit from innovations. So when you're a resource-hungry company, you don't have so much of slack to assign people to, okay, go and work on this new cool thing that we think is going to be the next big thing. So you have, but you still have to give the idea and the freedom for people to innovate, while not actually having a lot of resources, which is a lot of what most companies go through. So the key is, as Google does, and what we try to do, is to set the culture of innovation, which is to empower employees to make their decisions, give them the freedom to fail, even though it might mean a short-term setback. We don't penalize on those things, and we don't particularly tell them to go and work on this thing. We let people work on their own projects, and we have a democratic way of people to propose, let's work on this, let's work on that. And we take that into consideration when we're making company decisions. As well as the management, it's very easy for you to get detached from what's happening at the ground level. So my team, we usually go and get ourselves embedded in hackathons and developer level events, so that we go back to our roots as engineers and people who work with product and customers, so that we get new perspectives. And we are in the same shoes as our employees are, and that helps us keep the thinking that innovative thinking on top of our minds as well as our teams. So getting there and being among customers and well as people who are solving problems at a different level, as well as letting people have the freedom to innovate at whatever level, maybe changing a process or maybe changing the entire product line. Innovation happens at different levels, and you should allow for it, and you should make that verbal and visible to your team.
Thank you, Chandika. Before we get to the audience, let me just bring up one more topic with Julian, because it's already been touched upon by both Julian and Chandika. Entrepreneurship and innovation, those are intertwined with culture. You can't have one without the other. Culture fosters it. And here, certainly in Sri Lanka, the region, and talking to Julian earlier, and Singapore is not dissimilar. We have cultural barriers that hinder innovation. So just wanted to bring that theme up and have a discussion on what can we do about it. Of the cultural issues, the thing Chandika just mentioned, failure is a big issue. We look down on it. And that's a major issue. So if you can't fail, you're not going to take risks. If you're not taking risks, you're not really doing anything new, you're not innovating. So what do we do? So Chandika mentioned at a small company, he's doing something. How do we expand on that? How do we, not societally, how do we not count upon? I think it's a very nebulous question. I don't know how we really answer it, but I would value your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think it's a very real issue across the region, not just Sri Lanka. Obviously, it's my first visit, so I wouldn't pretend to know all the business culture, but from what I'm told, the premise of your question is this is an issue here as well. In Singapore, I've often talked to startups in Singapore, and they have, let's put it another way, there's a fear of risk with people's parents, actually. Younger people's parents, they're worried about what their parents are going to say. It's hard to go home to your parents and say, I've just put my savings into a digital startup in Singapore. Because it's much safer route to work for the government. The government pays very well in Singapore. It's a safe job, it's a respectable job, or maybe you should be a lawyer or a doctor. Are you sure you want to start a new business? So I think there's an undue, a relatively high influence, I guess, from parents. I don't know if it's the same here, in terms of what's acceptable to actually go and do. So I think that stymies a lot of people. They don't go out and take the risks that they would normally do so. And if you look in Silicon Valley, as many of you may have worked there or been there, that's not a problem there. Okay? In some ways, failure is a little bit of a badge of honor. And again, you see a lot of startups there. You hear about the successes, but there's thousands of startups that never really go anywhere. But the sheer volume, the number of people who are actually creating new companies means that a certain number of percentage are going to rise to the top. So to some degree, it's a volume game. We need to encourage more, particularly younger people, to start companies. The other element I see as a problem in the region is the education system. Particularly in our area, our industry is, I find it difficult to keep up with what's going on in the company myself. There's so much going on in the industry as a whole. And how do universities keep up? It used to be, 20 years ago, you went to the library and the books had to hold true for several years for their value in terms of education. But things are changing on a weekly, monthly basis in terms of our industry. And so how does the education system keep up with that? So I think there's probably more to be done on the public-private partnership in education to actually inspire people to go out and start companies. But one of the fundamental problems, I think, is it's not necessarily socially acceptable, or maybe that's too harsh. It's not cherished. Innovators and entrepreneurs aren't necessarily cherished in the way that they could be. And I think that holds true in many countries across the region.
Thank you. Why don't we open it up for some questions from the audience? And it's completely open. Theme is of course on ownership and innovation, but we can keep to the themes, some of the topics that we've discussed, or any opening questions. Comment back, and we get a mic.
My question really is, you talked a little bit about measurement. You mentioned metrics a little bit in your discussion in terms of innovation, of the importance of measuring innovation, but could you talk a little bit about how you do that? Because you know innovation is successful when it's successful, but how do you figure it out along the way?
The industry that we're in, that you can almost instantaneously see if it's working. Right? So in the offline world, I guess, if you decide to open a new retail store in a new area of town, you have to wait a few months to know whether it's going to work or not. In our business, you can almost instantaneously launch a product, and even in some cases within a few hours, have a good idea if it's going to be working or not. Right? So, well, actually, even before that, if you think about it, if you're launching a new handset, you can actually, or a new film, a movie, you can use tools. We have these tools available, Google Insights, actually. If you haven't seen it, it's free. It's something you can use that basically queries the back end of Google historically, and you can understand what the search patterns are. You can get to the point with data like this where you can start to predict. So a new handset by a big manufacturer comes out, you can see how many people are watching videos on YouTube, or you could look at the search volumes, or you could hear the social noise out there on the web, and it gives you a great idea of when it's going to be successful or not. So I don't think there's a lack of data. Even before you launch a product, I don't think it's being very well utilised by companies at all. And this is, you know, it really is kind of distressing sometimes when you go and talk to some of the ad agencies, because a lot of the media money is spent offline still. Right? But if I was placing an offline TV campaign for, I don't know, skiing holidays, I would go online and check when do people actually start looking for this stuff. So is it better to position my TV campaign a week before or a week after? Will it be more effective? So I think that our industry is partly to blame, because I think one of the things that people, in their mind, they think of the internet, they think of, say, e-commerce, and they think of online transactions. Well, in actual fact, even in the US, 90% of all transactions happen offline. Right? This is coming back to a question about data. In the US, 90% of things are bought offline in the physical world. People tend to go buy a car, even in the US, and they want to go and see it and touch it and feel it. But this kind of moment of truth or research when people are looking online is kind of key. So you can tell if you launch a new car, the likelihood of it being successful if you have the right analytics and looking at data. And what we're seeing across the world is, you know, about 75% of people will research a car online before they now go and buy one. So much of that decision process has happened online. So I think the combination of the offline and the online world, and being able to sort of traverse that analytically, the data is there, it's probably not being put into the right package in the right way as yet. So you can take external offline data, like the people in this room, how many people are there? They checked in to the hotel, did they check into the hotel, did they check into the registration? What do we know about the people in the hotel? In the offline world, it's harder, but on the online world, you know, we can track people and understand at an aggregate level what they're doing. This data is available now, and people aren't using it as much as they can. So we use obviously this own type of data in our own company to analyse our own products and get a sense. And often when the point about mobiles, we have the data. We know, we can see at Christmas, when people get their phones, their smartphones, and they unwrap them, the search volume just getting to a new level. Another wake-up call, I think, for us was during the Olympics in 2012, where you saw this concept of multi-device. And again, we had a data point. What happened during the opening ceremony, Paul McCartney was playing Hey Jude, and we saw a massive increase in the US and in Europe of people using a mobile device, whether it's a tablet or a mobile phone, searching for the Hey Jude lyrics. People were watching the TV, but they obviously either wanted to sing along or buy it on iTunes or whatever they want to do. And so this multi-device world was happening. So we were able to kind of measure that and say, well, what are the implications of that? And then how should we kind of change our product? So data is fundamental. Data in itself is not particularly useful. It's the insight that you derive from data. That's the tricky bit. And how you package these insights. And we have these issues with our customers too. We've got enormous amounts of data. I mean, if you think about Google, we're doing 100 million searches. There are 100 million searches in the world every month. Sorry, 100 billion, right? More than that actually. And so we've got a psychological footprint of what people are looking for, how they're looking for it. And mining that data, drawing out insights, and then being able to inform a decision making, a business decision, is a difficult thing to do, but the foundation is there, the data's there.
Thank you, Julian.
I have a question, I think, can pose it to all of the panelists. How within your respective organizations do you identify the ownership of innovation? In other words, you have people working in teams, you have people working individually, you have people, there's a constant cross-fertilization of ideas and discussion of ideas. How do you identify where the innovation is coming from, and how do you identify ownership of that innovation? And related to that is, once identified, how do you reward innovation? Because ultimately, the key to having innovation succeed as a concept is to incentivize it accordingly. So how do you identify the ownership of innovation, and how do you reward it?
That question probably has different answers.
Yes, exactly, which is why I wanted to present it to all the
Why don't
panelists.
we just start with Madu and maybe get a couple of perspectives on that.
Sure, I think that's a great question. So if you really look at in services space, you don't get very serious innovation by just one person. They may come up with the initial idea, but when you bounce it off with other people and you really add to that, that's where you really shape it up. So, we have a couple of things that we do in the company. Firstly, a lot of our rewards and recognition programs are around teams, not around individuals. Right? We do performance at individual level, but mostly rewards and recognition around team level. And we have a couple of things. One program that we really open up our customers' challenges into our teams, so that we've been working on one product or service for a customer, but we open up that whole team to work with any other area of challenges that the customer has. They can actually pose it to a team. We have a system which the customer can interact and our teams can interact, upvote and all that kind of stuff with ideas that help teams to bring an idea and then take it all the way up anywhere in the company. So it's complete visibility when somebody comes up with an idea. It could be somebody in a faraway place, thinking about a customer challenge that very quickly bubbles up to the customer executives or even the CEO level. And we recognize that in our quarterly event we have, which picks up some of these ideas across the project team, especially if idea that came up leads into revenue, and that get recognized. So we have two things to summarize. One, really we have a platform that helps people to come up with ideas and collaborate on it. So it's not one person but multiple people. And then we have a fairly structured way of picking that up and recognizing that at very, very high levels in the company. So people see that coming up with ideas as a serious accomplishment, and making revenue with it is even better.
I think we'll get
Yeah, Madu. So even if that's the way it's done in large companies, small companies should be do the same. It should be one person's job to innovate, because then it can easily be that person's job to innovate and not yours. So innovation is always a collaborative process. So when it happens within our team, we would someone would come up with it, and they would cross-pollinate it, talk with other people around it, and then build up some buzz for it. And then it goes across the team, and then we go and start working on it. When we do something great and it results in customer satisfaction or more engagement with users and so on, we celebrate it as a team. Being given that it's a small team, we reward everybody because that's how you build the value of innovation into the team, and one person doing it, one person thinking about it, does not mean everyone else can just sit back and not do anything about it. We should support everyone's ideas and grow them as a team. So that we very well ensure that, so that we don't reward innovation personally, we reward it as a team. And we also, however, we do recognize people for coming up with things. So we would thank them publicly. We would obviously take that into consideration in a performance evaluation on a personal level. However, at a team level, and it's very important to consider the culture that innovation is a team effort, and coming up with ideas does not, as in coming up with ideas by yourself, usually does not work. You have to talk about it with people, and also it's even better if you try to germinate this idea among customers or user base as evidence to the validity of your idea, because that's where great ideas come from your customers and your users.
Thank you, Lanka. That was an excellent question. With SLASSCOM as a mandate, of course, we are working towards building IT industry entrepreneurship throughout the country and the industry, but at the same time, we also want to help our membership or the member companies. And how do we do that in terms of innovating? And this is actually an excellent question. So given that, actually, why don't we get some also your thoughts as well on the same topic today?
Yeah, I was trying to work out what the opposite of innovation is. What's the word for the opposite of innovation? Stagnation, that's the closest one I came to. So the other way of reframing this question is, who's in charge of your stagnation? Bet the answer's probably nobody. So that's why I'm quite radical on this. I think innovation's owned by everybody, just like culture is not owned by a singular person. You do see some companies have a chief culture officer or chief innovation officer and all these things. I don't know, maybe they work successfully, but certainly from our perspective, everybody owns that. I think you made a good point earlier about there's different level. We're not always talking about driverless cars, right? We might be talking about a simple business process that's been done for 20 years, and someone comes along and says, well, look, we just changed this and this. We've saved ourselves 30% of time. Right? So I think unleashing the power of innovation across quite mundane and trivial things is just as powerful as having what's the next product area we're going into. Because I think the trouble with the word innovation, from my perspective, is always attached to luxury. It's a luxury, right? Innovation is a luxury. We'll make our money and pay our wages of the teams, and if we've got time, we'll do some innovation. I think what we're trying to do is pivot that so that it's just a foundation of everything that we're trying to achieve every day. It doesn't mean every day we come in and change everything, but we're trying to embed it fully into our company, which is a challenge. Because you need to have the tools to do it. You can't just say, right, we've become an innovative company now, so that's fine, everything's sorted. What we didn't show is there's a lot of effort within Google to put a lot of tools to make this happen. We have things like Fix-It, which is, and we use internal software platforms to do that. Like any company, we have an enormous amount of stuff that frustrates people, especially when you get to 50,000 people. And so regularly we have Fix-Its where people can suggest, why did it take me 3 days to get X paperwork back when if we did it this way it would take 12 hours? Can we just fix this? And so there's a flurry of ideas of little mundane trivial things to bigger things. And we regularly do these. The management team review them and say, well, those ones are frustrating but they're not going to make an impact to fix. Those ones are too hard, but here's a group of stuff we can do tomorrow that will really kind of free up time, resources and stuff like that. So it's critically important that you have the tools. When I say tools, they're not necessarily software tools, but the policies in place, the encouragement, the incentives to make this a reality, and then you regularly review it. And one of the things that we do as well is we try to gauge where we are as an innovative culture regularly. We have this survey we call Google Glass Survey. We survey all the employees. We've just done it recently. And one of the things we're measuring is, do you feel Google is more innovative than last year or less, or what areas you can improve? So it doesn't matter which stage your company's at, measuring that, where you're at, benchmarking it and then trying to improve is also a key kind of element.
Thank you. Imran?
Julian, there are two ways for a corporate maybe to promote innovation. One is internally, and the other is by simply going out there and buying a small innovative company, or sometimes the case of medium company as well. How has Google integrated the companies that it has bought, and how has it impacted on the innovativeness of those companies? Comparing it prior to it being bought by Google, which is now a huge company. Has it become as innovative as before those companies, or have they just meshed into a bigger, larger company and corporate like Google?
This is a big challenge because we have acquired a significant number of companies, very small companies, sort of 5 people, 10 people for the engineers often. Sometimes they're known as acqui-hires, often very good products as well. And sometimes much larger companies, certainly in terms of how much we spend on those companies, such as YouTube, Motorola, DoubleClick, the bigger ones, we've made some on the enterprise side as well. I think that in the case of a Motorola, it's a very different business than the hardware business. That's run as a separate company. In the case of YouTube, we have focus around YouTube, so we have someone who is responsible for that as a product. But in terms of integration, some integration is needed. I think there's no single right answer. It depends on the company and the strategy you're actually pushing through. So, for example, the sales teams that we have across the region, they are selling video advertising on YouTube, but they're also selling Google Search, the same people. It doesn't make sense to have 10 different sales teams selling all different products, so there's integration there. And then, of course, there's platform integrations, which I'm not the biggest expert on, but a lot of companies acquire, and then it's actually, you can make savings from the company you bought by moving it onto a common platform. It makes it more efficient. So there isn't a silver bullet answer to that. I think we've tended towards looking on a case-by-case basis, and some are more heavily integrated. One thing that we do try and do, though, is where the company sits directly under the Google umbrella, the cultural integration is really important. We don't want to dilute our culture or change our culture. Our culture's changing, but we don't want to risk diluting the values that we have as a culture. So I think that's one of the key things. I think if there was a company that was very culturally different from ours, that would be one of the question marks. How easy is it to integrate that into a culture, particularly when you've got large numbers of people? Obviously, these smaller acqui-hires or 5 or 10 people, it's much easier. The challenge there is to make sure that they can come into a bigger company and be successful within a bigger company. And I think because the founders started with just them, they do have some experience of this, growing a company from 2 people. So I think they're very sympathetic and big advocates of entrepreneurs, and are very respectful, particularly of engineering talent, and not to stymie that, and make sure that there's an open kind of an open atmosphere for them to thrive within the Google environment.
Just one more follow-up question. This is a bit different from the topic, but I guess it's a key part of innovation. This whole debate about net neutrality and the government's attempt to control the internet from ICANN and so on. How important is it to have a free internet in terms of innovation, or do you believe maybe if you look at the other side of the coin, innovation will still continue irrespective of who controls the internet? How does Google see this?
We're very much on the side of a free and open internet. We tend to find open is better. Just as fast is better than slow. Open is better than closed from our perspective. And this is not just about Google, this is about the users being able to have a voice. One of the best things that's happened over the last few years is the democratization of the web. And the web offers enormous amounts of opportunity for businesses as well. And we're very much, our stance on this is very clear. An open and free internet is key to making it the most innovative tool for humanity that it can be. I'm sure there's varying degrees of that, but that's kind of our stance on it.
Thank you again, Julian. I want to switch to something actually quite positive. You mentioned during your presentation, Julian, that there's expected to be 500 million people coming online in the next 2 years in the emerging market versus 15 million in the United States.
James listening.
Now, if you expand on that theme, the population centers are here, the economies are here, the number 2 economy, the number 3 economy, that's Asian, and those things all seem great. It is still the fact that being in Silicon Valley definitely adds something to a startup. Seems like it is ebbing a little bit. People are comfortable starting up in Boston and New York. So where do you see that going in terms of today, the view of Silicon Valley? It will take another 20 years for another place to be able to create and say, okay, now it doesn't matter, you can start in there, or is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And how do you go about building that Silicon Valley economy?
Yeah, and this debate was had in, actually my colleague in the United Australia was talking about Silicon Beach, Australia, and this was kind of a meme that was kind of getting going in terms of that idea. I know, the analogy I use is movies. So Hollywood movies get all the press, right? But it's not the biggest film industry, is it? It's Bollywood, isn't it? So culturally in the US, people look to, I guess, the Googles, the Facebook, these big, large companies. But there are also lots of successful homegrown companies right across this region. I mean, if you look at Google, Google is not the #1 search engine in China. It's not the #1 search engine in Korea. Right? It's not the #1 search engine in many other markets around the world. There are local players. There are local social networking players. There are local video network players in many of these countries. I don't think the US has a monopoly on innovation at all. I think there are issues around culturally or fostering an environment where you get a higher volume number of startups. And it's something the Singapore government often talks about because there just isn't the volume. I think there's another thing we haven't talked about which is linked to innovation, I think is risk. People tend to be more risk averse. There's the abundance of funding, of course, but there are new models we were talking about earlier where funding can become more prevalent. There are a lot of government initiatives around the region to try and foster companies. But I just think the sheer numbers and the volume and the culturally specific products, if you think there are 2.3 billion people online, which seems like everyone's online from the Western perspective, but most of the world's population is not online yet. And they're not necessarily going to buy into the offerings that are designed culturally in the US or Europe. There's going to be successful, and there are successful companies in this region. The reason probably we're not seeing as many is the environment needs to be, the garden needs to be watered, and that's kind of tricky. It's not kind of one remedy that automatically makes the perfect kind of startup environment. I don't know what the government's doing here in terms of how they're promoting this, but we always find when we go around the region, I mean, Indonesia is a great example where there's 250 million people, and every time we go there to an event, there are 600-800 people in the room, and they've all got a business idea. And one of the things we've also noticed is scarcity kind of brings clarity. So in emerging markets where actually there's more, it's less rich countries, that actually makes people more kind of focused and more entrepreneurial in some cases. You could argue that Singapore is actually quite a very rich country, and there isn't necessarily that urgency. I don't think all the startups are going to drive Asia are going to come from Singapore. They're probably going to come from Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand. They're going to come from economies that are growing quickly. And we've got 2 million people online. Yeah. So I think the other thing is you need more users online so that people can see the business opportunity to connect with them. When you've only got 10% penetration, it's hard to create a business with revenues that is going to be significant. And that's changing quickly. So it's gearing up the foundations for when this grows, or as it grows. I think it's kind of key.
Yeah, let me add a point to that. I think if you look at why we see a lot of the innovations come from the West, I believe it's largely because the large part of consumption happens there. You really see the opportunity when you're in front of seeing something happening. And I think with the emerging markets and a lot of the consumption now shifting into Asia, right? For example, I think about it's 4 or 5 years ago, China became the largest auto market, not the manufacturer auto market, right? There are more people buy cars in China than any other country, right? And you can think about 10 years down the line, where you find automobile innovation? It probably will come from there, right? You take a innovation like Tata Nano, that could never come from in the West because you don't see that problem, right? Of 10 people going in a motorcycle, right? That's how you come up with the Tata Nano idea. So I think as the consumption shifts, you will find a lot of that innovation will follow, and you will really see a lot of that will come from this part of the world as the India, China, and the other region picks up. I think the interesting thing is that with open communication and media, now if you take a 15-year-old kid in the US and take a 15-year-old kid in India or Sri Lanka, if you ask them, if you ask the kid in the US, you don't know who's the president of Sri Lanka or president of India, they would have no clue whether Sri Lanka is a country or not even, right? Whereas if you ask a kid in Asia, what is US and who's the president, they will have the whole idea about the countries, right? So as consumption shift to Asia, with the media, you'll also find that people in this part of the world have a more rounded view about the world, right? They know both sides of the world. And you will find a lot more innovation that which may go across the world as opposed to just some of the innovation that, to your point, is probably not very suitable that is out there today for the Asian regions, right? So I think there's a huge shift. It could happen that innovation center will shift into this region as the consumption shifts and the media is opened up that broader, full view of the world, if you like, as opposed to half view of the world. So I think there is the real shift that could happen, which is in the next 10 years or so. I think we see that happening already.
Thank you, Madu. Why don't we take one or two more questions from the audience, time permitting?
Hi, Sanath. I will have a question for Julian about the people strategy in Google. You mentioned about the diverse workforce, so how do you leverage on the diverse workforce to drive innovation? I also like to hear your thoughts about how you manage the diversity of the workforce, especially with the young people who is a new generation, we call them Generation Z, when compared to the management team who may be Generation X or baby boomers. So what are your thoughts on leveraging the diverse workforce?
Yeah, I think in Singapore we have like 50 different nationalities in the office. So it's extremely diverse, everyone from all regional Southeast Asia nationalities, but Western as well, and everything in between. So it's very diverse naturally in terms of race and gender. It's interesting, is it Generation Z now? I'm actually 23, I don't look it, but I really sympathise with that generation. But it's a thing that comes up a lot, actually, because put your hand up if you manage the younger people in your organisation. Yeah. Certainly in the West and when in Australia and to a degree Singapore, people's expectations of what the workplace is has completely changed. There's people a lot more demanding, particularly well-educated people who can leave and go work somewhere else. They're more demanding upon the organisation they're working for in terms of the benefits that they expect. And it's not just money. Money's often number 3 or 4 on the list in many of these countries in terms of why people work in a company. They demand that the company has an innovative culture, that has some of the things you expect, like a nice open office and environment, facilities, childcare, so on and so forth, food. So people's expectations are going up. One of the challenges, I think, particularly with the younger generation's expectation to move through quickly an organisation. So you get more knocks on the door in terms of promotion, perhaps than you would for other people. And maybe they're right. It was common, really, I guess, for people to work for the same company for 10, 20, 30 years. I guess in my father's generation, and less so mine. It's getting shorter and shorter, that time period. When you're hiring, if someone's jumped jobs every 2 years, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer is. Superficially, it's a bad thing. Maybe they can't stay somewhere. Maybe, and they haven't made a contribution in that time. maybe it's a good thing. Maybe they're very ambitious, and maybe they've, they're driving their career forward very quickly. These are questions that have risen to the surface, I guess, with the new generation. The other thing is expectation. There was an interesting debate in the press about whether people should work at home or not, and how useful that is or not. These questions are coming to the surface about work culture like they never did 10, 20 years ago. And I think it's something everyone, we have to be aware of. The diversity piece is easy. We want a diverse, when I say it's easy because we know what we want to get to, which is to have as diverse a workplace as possible. In terms of how we manage some of the younger generation, their expectations, that's certainly more challenging. And my counterparts in other organisations that's front of mind for them too. How do they do that? Expectations are certainly different. Obviously, when you have a low unemployment rate, that allows people to be a bit more vocal. If there's a high unemployment rate, as there has been in many Western countries, there's a sense that you've got a job, so you should be pleased with that. So I think it's really dependent on the situation of the country.
Thank you, Julian. Would Chandika, Madu, would you like to share your thoughts?
Well, we don't have so much experience managing younger people, given our average age in the company is just under 30. So we've had an experience of the company everyone being single and free and moving and becoming young families, which is what I think Virtusa went through as well. And when you see this, so the company events become going on hikes to going to the theme park with your family, and everyone's invited. So the company has to recognize the cultural shift, while keeping in mind there are different age groups of people and their interests are different. So it is important to cater for all these things, and it is also important to involve even the person who's very old in the younger person's activities, so there's some bonding that happens. So that also helps, as in with a nod towards having a diverse workplace. I think that is one of the most important things in fostering innovation, because when you're starting out or when you're first in a hiring position, you would like to hire people that are like you. So if you're an engineer, you feel more comfortable with engineers more than sales guys. So you have more engineers. That is not a good thing, because obviously different cultures and different people, different backgrounds, bring in important perspectives that what you don't know of what you don't know. So having a diverse workplace, be it gender, culture, or professional background, is very, very important to establish in an innovative workplace and a culture. And also removing most of the rules and assumptions of who says that the 40-year-old can't come on a hike with us. You should ask him. Don't assume and plan your own trip in a corner. So I think breaking those rules and letting everyone join in is important.
So the thing I just add to that, sorry, when I thought about it, is a lot of companies promote by tenure. We don't have that concept. It's actually quite a dangerous concept. Now, it means, let me rephrase that. If you have to have a certain tenure to get promoted, but tenure shouldn't be the way to get promoted. So if you want to try and create a meritocracy, which generally work better, we're trying to promote people who are the best people to promote, not necessarily the people who've been there the longest. It does create some issues, particularly in Asia, where there's a sense that if you've been somewhere a long time, you should just keep going up the poo path. That's not healthy. So as a result, we interact with many companies where we see the same sort of 60-year-old grey men running their companies. We're not seeing enough diversity there. Someone was given their job because of tenure, and there are some frustrated people underneath who are very talented. There's certain things you can put in place to kind of restrict or to stop this happening. And there's also a lot of unconscious bias that we see. I mean, if you look at I was looking at some data on CEOs on the S&P 500, and a much higher proportion of them than the average height exists. So I think it's something like 15% of them are over 6'2". And in reality, I think a much smaller percentage of the population is that. It's something like 4 or 5 times the amount of people who should be that height on average are in those positions. So does it mean if you're tall, you're a better CEO? Probably not. So there's a lot of conscious bias, which is dangerous obviously, but there's a lot of unconscious bias that happens in every company. And one of the things we're trying to focus on, how much unconscious bias is going on. We should be aware of that. It's not that the company controls that. Right? Each individual, every hiring person, every person who makes a promotion decision. So this is an interesting territory, a bit uncomfortable to talk about. Something we're looking at in terms of understanding the data that's out. There's a lot of data on this. But that health, it comes back to that health of that culture being a proxy for having a lot of innovation within the company.